we are pretty good at tracking these ships, even when they turn off their AIS. We and the Americans have a really good capability.
The US Coast Guard boarded a fifth oil tanker today, continuing to eye other vessels attempting to evade the US blockade on ships travelling to and from Venezuela. Meanwhile, the Times has revealed that 10 Russian Shadow Fleet vessels sailed through the Channel yesterday, a day after British forces helped the United States to seize a vessel north of Scotland. Well, let's talk about all this. In a moment, we'll turn to Lord West, Alan West, former First Sea Lord and Labour peer. But let's first go to Andrei Soldatov, who's a Russian security expert. Good afternoon, Andrei.
Good afternoon.
Just tell us for a moment, just put us in the picture for people who might not be familiar with the terms ghost fleet or ships sailing in dark mode. Just describe the different types of ships in this so-called shadow fleet of Russia's and how it works.
Well, the shadow fleet is, it became a big thing since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine when Russia came under Western sanctions, and the shadow fleet is a collection. Now we are talking about several hundreds of vessels acquired by different entities, with a final beneficiary being Russia, to help Russia to avoid sanctions and to help Russia to transport oil to other destinations.
And we saw these 10 Russian vessels go through the English Channel yesterday. Is that a stepping up of activity, or is that sort of par for the course with Russia?
It is to some extent, especially after the recent events when we see that Donald Trump decided to step up his operations against the Russian shadow fleet, which is a very big development.
So how much does Russia's economy depend on this shadow fleet? And what is it? Is it basically oil that it's shipping out?
Yeah, it's mostly about oil. I would not say that it's absolutely crucial, because there is still other ways to transport Russian oil to, say, China and India. But it is important, and it's important not only for the Russian economy and for the Russian war machine, which is extremely important of course, for the war in Ukraine. It's also important as 2025 for Russian sabotage operations. We've seen in 2025 that these vessels were used for, drone attacks on Denmark and Germany.
And so we've just heard today of the fifth vessel being seized by the US. Is this something that's going to keep happening? Is it a difficult and risky operation, or is it something that America's going to get a taste for now?
I would say we are in uncharted territories, because what also happened in 2025, and it never happened before, the shadow fleet is supposed to be in the shadows, but in the summer of 2025, the Russian Navy started escorting these tankers, especially in the English Channel. And we saw several occasions when Russian warships escorted those tankers. Apparently, the same thing happened with the tanker which was detained by the Americans. There was a Russian submarine, and as Trump said, there was also a warship. And nobody knows what's going to happen if, say, at one moment the Russian ships decide to actively prevent Americans from boarding these tankers.
Andrei Soldatov, thank you very much for joining us with that assessment. Let's turn now to Admiral Lord West, Alan West, who's former First Sea Lord and Labour peer, who's on the line now. Good afternoon, Lord West.
Good afternoon.
Well, we've heard a bit of analysis about what this shadow fleet entails. Let's just talk about this latest seizure by the US Coast Guard, the fifth sanctioned oil tanker. Are you supportive of US seizures in this area? Do you think indeed that perhaps the international community has been sort of asleep at the wheel or the helm for too long?
I very much support what the Americans are doing and actually drawing this to everyone's attention. I think we've been rather pusillanimous about it, and I know your last speaker talked about the impact on the Russians. There's no doubt if the shadow fleet couldn't operate, it would have a very large impact on the Russians. I mean, it wouldn't mean that they had to stop the war straight away, but it has a huge impact. And this has been quite clear now for 2 or 3 years. And we've done almost nothing about it.
So what more needs to be done, and how can that be done? How easy is it?
Well, in fact, we are pretty good at tracking these ships, even when they turn off their AIS. We and the Americans have a really good capability.
Intelligence, that is, basically.
It is effectively. It's satellites and SIGINT and a whole raft of things. So we know where they are. We have within our own country a system called the MCT, Maritime Counterterrorism. It's on standby all the time for immediate readiness. It has helicopters and then special boat section Marines. They're effectively they're SAS, but they're called the special boat section. They are absolute experts at boarding merchant ships and getting on them really without the people on board there knowing it's happening until it's too late.
Because, of course, there are many critics who say, well, the UK participating in this US-led scheme to seize these tankers is actually exposing Britain to potential reprisals from Russia. That is a fear, and there's a fear of a sort of accidental escalation of this, isn't there, with two great military powers, in a standoff, really.
Well, I mean, I think there always is a concern, but there are times where one has to harden one's resolve and do what is right. And basically, sanctions were taken out against the Russians, and this is their way of dodging them. And a lot of these ships are breaking the rules, the rules for that govern international waters, and therefore it's quite justifiable to board them and arrest them if they change their ownership partway through, if they if they're unsafe, a whole raft of different issues. And I'd leave it to the lawyers, but we've got the best lawyers in this country for maritime issues in the world. That's why the IM was here.
Well, no, I'll come on to Venezuela in a minute, but I mean, there's many questions about the legality of that operation, but there haven't been so many questions about the legality of this initiative to seize these tankers, despite Russia describing it as piracy. What have you managed to establish about the scale of this problem? Is Russia the main culprit, or other countries, for example, India, also involved in this sort of shadow fleet operation?
Well, when I sort of started digging around in this over 2 years ago, for example, I discovered a ship owner in Mumbai who was a small fry. He had a little coaster, and he actually had built up over 100 tankers, super tankers and things, because he was bringing his oil into India because it suits India. And once you mix the oil with other oil, it's very difficult to ascertain that it's Russian oil, if you see what I mean. So
that ship owner, what have you managed to find out about what's happened to them?
I haven't been able to dig any further into that. I mean, I'd have to leave that to the agencies and things to do that. But that's an example of someone in India, getting in on this act, so to speak.
But 100 ships, I mean, that's a vast enterprise, isn't it?
It is. It's huge.
I mean, a criminal enterprise.
Yes, yes, because he's breaking sanctions, but he's getting a nod, isn't he, for this? He must be. The other thing is, the really worrying thing is, all of these ships are pretty substandard ships. He hasn't got a fleet of fantastic, top-notch ships, and nor are the rest of the Russian shadow fleet. A lot of them are very dangerous.
Yeah, and environmentally as well. I mean, if they leak.
Absolutely, there'll be a terrible accident. And then, of course, there's no insurance. There's no insurance covering them. So the whole thing is really wrong and needs to be sorted out.
You're on the Intelligence and Security Committee. I know you've got to be careful what you say, but do you sense exasperation, concern in the intelligence community about how long it's taken for authorities in the UK, but also the US, to get a grip of this?
I can't really talk about anything that's happened in the ISC, but what I can say is I certainly feel a sense of exasperation. I mean, if you look at Hansard, you'll see that I've talked on this issue quite a number of times, and I think it's about time. The Russians, they are very sensitive to it. So you're right that there's there is an issue of tension building up into crisis because they see how important it is. And when, for example, the Finns captured the ship that was they thought had ripped some of their undersea cables, the Russians reacted quite violently to that in terms of overflights and all sorts of things. So I think it is, it really has an impact on them. And you're quite right. one always has to be careful when one's dealing at this sort of level with these sorts of issues.
I know something you may want to be a bit more voluble about is the report in the Times about the warning from the Air Chief Marshal, Sir Richard Knighton, a £28 billion shortfall in defence funding. There is this promise to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, 3.5% by 2035. But there seems to be little idea of how we're going to get there and not a great sense of urgency. I just wonder what your message was to your own party leader, the Prime Minister, and the Chancellor, of course.
Well, Kathy, you've hit the nail on the head. It's urgency. There is no sense of urgency. All the right things are being said, but they're talking about money slowly arriving downstream, or in the mid 2030s, this sort of thing, and that is no good. They have to
spell out why it's no good, given the situation we're in with these military conflicts around the world. Why is it no good to wait?
Well, because of people who are having wars, they don't wait for you to be ready till they have a war. The war could start tomorrow, and also you can't just suddenly start spending money. You need to give advance notice. The SMEs, defence firms need to start building up capability. All of that needs money now if you're going to start delivering things in 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years' time.
You said the war could start tomorrow. I mean, I assume that was a figure of speech. But, are you of the view, looking at everything going on around the world, that we are in very perilous times and anything could happen in this situation that could see us embroiled in a war at any moment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've never known such a perilous time in my whole time in the Navy. I'm still on the active list, so that's 60 years. It shows what an old bugger I am. But I mean, it is very, very perilous indeed. And every day you see other things happening. I mean, we've almost been overtaken. The media, I feel sorry for the media. They can't keep up with all the things that are happening, and so many of them are risky. And,
well, I'm on day 10 at work, so I'm feeling that, let's have a little pause in the news for, just a few hours would be good. Get a bit of kip. Lord West, Alan West, very good to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme.